Thanks for joining us here at The Research Her, the show working to improve the health disparities for women of color, one topic at a time. And I am Alicia. I'm here learning and growing with you as we research our way to wellness. Welcome to the show, beautiful. Yes, you listening. I didn't go straight into the interview. I'm talking to you. I hope you're having a beautiful day. And if you're not, I hope this made it. Today, I will be interviewing Chrystelle Vilfranc. And she schools us today, okay? She tells us about the different types of liver cancer, and we get to get some insight into the research that she does related to it. We learn from her that our community is not plagued by this disease, but yet we still get it. So I think that this is the perfect conversation if you want to just learn a little bit about liver cancer. She is currently a Ph.D. candidate studying cancer and cell biology. She went to Oakwood College and got her bachelor's degree in biochemistry and mathematics. Double major. What you mean? And some of her research areas are liver injury and DNA damage and response. The specific focus of her project is that she is using a mutant mouse model to understand novel roles of DNA damage repair and response pathways in the regulation of protection against acute and chronic liver disease, including hepatocellular carcinoma, which is the most common form of liver cancer. She hopes to provide new knowledge for the understanding of liver tumor initiation and progression, as well as providing new information for possible cancer therapeutics. Outside of lab, though, she serves as the digital creator for Vanguard STEM. You can look up the hashtag, which will be in the show notes. And she is very passionate about mental health and mental well-being. So she started writing a series in collaboration with Vanguard STEM known as Reveal to Heal. And that can be found on Medium. All of her information will be in the show notes. So let's get into the conversation with Chrystelle. Welcome, Chrystelle. How are you?
I'm good.
Yes, I'm so excited to be talking to you. Yeah, let's get started. When you were in high school, did you know that you would become a biologist?
No. So I was always interested in science, but in high school, you couldn't tell me anything. I was going to medical school. I did like every single pre-med opportunity that I could find for like high school students. I was so focused on like going to medical school.
How did it like shift gears for you from medical school to where you are now?
College was the game changer for me. Being around like everyone that was pre-med, and like I realized, I kind of had like a lot of questions, scientific questions. I wanted to like get deeper. I winded up doing this research program at Oakwood, which is my alma mater, where I really started to fall in love with doing research. But I was doing plant physiology research, which is not what I'm doing now. And that inspired me to continue to look into doing research because I've always wanted to like study cancer, but I just felt like I had to go to medical school. The only doctors that I knew back then were all MDs. I didn't know any PhDs. I didn't meet my first PhD until I was in college. So I didn't really know that was a thing. Like, I don't know why, like, it didn't occur to me that people who do like cancer research weren't medical doctors. I don't know. I was naive. Being in college, like, really opened my mind to more opportunities. And then my research advisor, I told him, like, I think I want to continue doing research. And so he was like, you should apply to get your PhD, like, because he knew I wanted to go to medical school. He was like, do you really want to go to medical school? I was like, well, he's like, did you take the MCAT? I'm like, well, I was not trying to take the MCAT because it was just like, oh my gosh, I got to revisit organic chemistry and physics. No thanks. So he was just like, girl, why don't you just try to apply for PhD programs? I was like, I could do that, like, right out of college. He was like, yes, apply. Like, you never know what's going to happen. And so that's how like I winded up getting into PhD programs.
Let's just take a step back. How did you end up choosing your PI for undergrad?
I remember we had to choose an advisor that was in our department. And I think there was only two that were working with that research program. One of the students that was in my class that worked in his lab told me like, yo, you should ask him if you could like volunteer and get in his lab. Sorry, I say yo a lot, y'all. I'm from New York. But there's like, yeah, ask him or whatever. And so I did. I volunteered for like a semester and I really liked it. He actually like immediately put me on a project that was close to publication. That's when he was actually the one that told me that I should apply to the research program at Oakwood. And I was just like, oh, I don't know if I'll really get in. He was like, do it. Like, I'll write your recommendation. I'll recommend you should do it. So that's how like I wound up choosing him, because he really, just from one semester volunteering, he really became invested in like training me as a scientist. So that's how I chose him.
Did you ever feel any way with being a Black woman in the research, or did that never affect you in your journey?
My research advisor, he's a Russian man. And like, actually, like, yeah.
But he works at a HBCU,
yeah.
So.
Yes. He's like, there aren't that many Black PhDs. There's not that many Black PhD women. And he would say like, look at the faculty members in this department alone that have PhDs. How many of them are actually Black? And there were two at the time, only two. So, that was just like a eye opener for me. I really appreciated him having that much confidence in me, because honestly, I didn't think that I had what it took. I really appreciated him like having that faith in me and being able to call out, yo, like there aren't that many Black women PhDs. You should change that. Mm-hmm. It was like a reminder to me, because like at my first college, the first time that I did meet PhDs, I met one Black woman PhD. She was responsible for like our labs, like our biology labs. I was like, oh, wow, like that's kind of how I got into looking into biomedical science PhDs, because I saw her doing it. And I was like, I looked up her name and found out like she has a PhD in biology. That's when I was like, oh, snap. Like, so
I could do this.
Yeah. Like, like I started finding there were different fields within biomedical science. And I was like, I should do this. I kept it as a thought in the back of my head, because I still was trying to convince myself that I could go to medical school. But in the back of my head, I knew I didn't want to go to medical school. I knew like I wanted to do something different.
How did you end up choosing your PI that you work for now? What was the journey to your research?
At that time, when I had first came in, I had only one intense year of biomedical research. So like I mentioned, my undergrad research was in plant physiology. That's completely different from what I wanted to do. I wanted to study cancer in some sense. Looking at plants, forces of plants, and like the hunting cycles of plants, like that wasn't going to help me like learn cancer. I was really new to this whole thing. At the time, like I appreciated that her lab environment was smaller, because other labs that I had rotated in were much larger. And I realized like, I would need a little bit more attention, because there's a lot of techniques that I would need to learn. The postdocs in the lab were pretty helpful. The projects that, she told me about, they seemed to have a lot of promise. And so that's what interested me and wanting to like join her lab. Plus she was satisfied with how I performed during my rotation. And so she invited me to be a part of her lab.
Let's get into the research. How popular is liver disease, and how is it impacting our community?
Yeah, so liver disease is pretty popular. We see more cases of like liver disease and more chronic liver diseases in sub-Saharan Africa, parts of Asia. It's more popular in those areas. In the US, we do see like different instances of chronic liver disease, especially because obesity and like diabetes are becoming a bigger thing. And those are risk factors for chronic liver disease. It's becoming a little bit more popular. We do see like for liver cancer, Hispanic men and women are more susceptible. I have a few stats. Hispanic men and women, they have higher rates. And then Asian and Pacific Islanders are next, then American Indians or Alaskans, and then Blacks, and then whites. Liver cancer is more seen in men versus women. For some cases of breast cancer, estrogen actually promotes this cancer and makes it worse, whatever. But in this case, like having estrogen signaling in women's bodies is actually better for us in protecting us against liver disease. The reason for this is because many different studies have looked at this protein called IL-6 or interleukin 6. And basically, interleukin 6 promotes inflammation. And inflammation is a big risk factor for cancer, period. But for liver cancer, it drives liver cancer. IL-6 is one of the big problems because women have estrogen. Estrogen has been found to prevent how much IL-6 is being produced. So we are not producing as much IL-6 as men are because of estrogen. Of course, this won't be for every woman because we have a lot of different, reproductive diseases or disorders that cause women to have lower estrogen.
So are there different types of liver disease?
Yes. Liver disease it's a progressive thing. So the liver is a very important organ. So many things comes through to the liver, and the liver has so many different responsibilities. It's responsible for clearing out any drugs or alcohol, clearing the blood that comes from like our digestive tracts. Because of all of the stuff that the liver has to take on, that makes it more susceptible to damage and forms of injury. But there are two main categories that we look at liver diseases most of the time. We have non-alcoholic liver diseases, and then you have your alcoholic liver diseases. Non-alcoholic liver diseases, oftentimes it progresses from like fatty liver disease to something called steatohepatitis, which again promotes more inflammation, which, I said is a big risk factor for liver cancer. And then insult, or if you get another form of insult, and let's say you even have like genetic predispositions, you have certain genes that are on that aren't supposed to be on, or you have certain genes that are off that are actually supposed to be on to control things and maintain the normal function of your liver. If you have those predispositions, plus you have, again, using the example of like a fatty diet or even alcohol, like that promotes the insult, that keeps giving insults to the liver. And so it'll progress from like just fatty liver disease to hepatitis. And then from hepatitis, it can progress to fibrosis. And then up until that point, you can really just remove those insults. And the liver is so great in that it can actually start healing itself. So it's like once you remove those insults, you give the liver time to like get itself together. So like all of the damaged liver cells is going to try to clear those out, remove those before they start having daughter cells. We have all of these damaged daughter cells, and that promotes more inflammation, etc. And then you have where the liver allows for new cells to be made, new healthy cells. But again, this only happens when you remove one or both of the insults or however many insults you have. So up until fibrosis, you can still reverse back to fatty liver and then even to being a normal liver again. But if you move past the stage of fibrosis, you can move from fibrosis to something called cirrhosis. Cirrhosis, that's the first point of no return, and then can progress eventually to hepatocellular carcinoma, which is like one of the most common forms of liver cancer. That's the liver cancer that I study.
Could we talk a little bit about what the overarching idea of your research is and how does it relate back to the liver cancer?
Our lab studies this humongous protein, and so it's able to have its hands in a lot of different functions of the cell. It's mostly known for being able to block cell death. That could be a problem if you have damaged cells. Like I was mentioning before, if you have damaged cells, you don't want them sticking around, because if they wind up dividing and having daughter cells, those daughter cells will also have that damage that the parent cell had. That's why, cells have this thing that we call apoptosis or cell death. This protein that we study is a big protein that's able to prevent cell death, which is not really a great thing in some cases. Sometimes you don't want the cells to just be dying all of the time, but there's, the cells have their own ways to control when and where that happens. Our lab also found that this protein is actually involved in promoting DNA repair. If your DNA gets damaged, our protein is one of the players. There's so many different proteins that play a role in repairing the DNA because the cell is going to want to stop all other functions to repair this one little spot of DNA damage because it can't go on with the other functions. And we have shown like that without our protein, these DNA repair pathways are actually down. Like they're not working as efficiently as they would with our protein. Basically, I give my mice this drug that can cause DNA damage. Basically, like if this insult is allowed to stay within the liver for a long time, it eventually causes liver cancer. And so I have mice that are normal mice and I have mice that do not have our protein. And so I want to see whether or not the function of like our protein in like repairing DNA damage is so important in the liver that without it, you have increased DNA damage and you have all different functions happening where you wind up getting inflammation and then these mice wind up getting cancer. And so some of my results have shown that with like if we lose my protein or if the mice don't have my protein in the liver, these mice get tumors faster than the normal mice. These mice also have increased DNA damage. These mice have different pathways that are known, like well studied, to drive liver cancer. And so without my protein, it seems that those pathways that drive liver cancer, they seem like they're overactive. Might be that my protein is controlling. Like I said, it's a really big protein, so it has to do more than just, regulating DNA damage and blocking cell death. It can also be like controlling whether or not this pathway that causes cancer is blocked or not. And so without it, we're seeing all of these changes in our mice. And I'm basically trying to understand exactly what pathways our protein is playing in to protect the liver under normal conditions.
Okay, and what can the scientific community take from this, and like what would be a good follow-up study once you get your results?
What I'm hoping is that my studies can allow our protein to be what is known like as a biomarker. Biomarkers are basically proteins that, you might want to look out for. If you have this protein, you're going to be more vulnerable to this type of a disease or this type of cancer. Or if you don't have this protein, you're going to be more vulnerable to this type of disease or this type of cancer. Like those types of proteins that promote cancer, those are called oncogenes. And proteins that, are normally preventing cancer, those are called tumor suppressors, where they're suppressing tumor formation. And so what we're trying to show is that it's possible that our protein is a tumor suppressor in the liver, because without it, we're seeing more of a dramatic liver cancer phenotype. Eventually, if we follow this up with more studies in clinic, because we've even looked at like human patient samples and looked at whether or not patient samples that had these more extreme liver diseases like cirrhosis, the point of no return diseases like cirrhosis and liver cancer, there's less expression of our protein in those diseases in human patients. So if you follow those up with more human trials showing for real, like this protein is actually important for the liver, then this protein can become like a biomarker. It can be used to try to target and prevent whether or not these other pathways that it's playing in are actually going to be active or not. We hope that this could eventually be like some type of marker that could be used like in diagnostics, and then like people could design things for therapies. I'm not really a therapy person. I'm more of like prevention and understanding.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you're doing really impactful work, and I appreciate you sharing this with us.
Thank you.
I have a few more questions more related to you. So I want to know what or who inspires you?
My dad is definitely one of my biggest inspirations. I like to call him my first science teacher. He's part of the reason why I wanted to go to medical school, because my dad went to medical school out of the country, but he wasn't able to practice medicine when he returned back to the United States. in a sense, I kind of wanted to avenge him, and like become the medical doctor that he couldn't be. Not just because he wanted me to do it, because he would always share different things about medicine or science, or I would come home with different things that I was learning in science and explain to him. Like in college, sometimes I would practice things that I learned in biology classes or chemistry classes or whatever, or even like when I got to grad school, like every time I would learn something really interesting, like I call my dad and I'll be like, yo, you know what, I listen to what I learned today, like this is so crazy, like, and he can still remember like some of that stuff, like, and he has medical education, and so we're able to go back and forth about different things. For him, like, he's an extreme like health nut. He's very healthy, and with me learning about liver disease, he's just like, yo, you got to start looking at like diet and how diet is like affecting liver diseases, and you got to show like how healthier diets will help everything. And I'm like, all right, sir, more to life and just like, having a healthy diet. We also have to take into counter genetics and all that stuff. So he's one of my main inspirations. I would say like my family period is my inspiration, because they encourage me to keep going, because this PhD journey, girl,
You don't even have to tell me.
like, oh my gosh. But thankfully, I have 3 nieces, and I think like it's really important for me to finish this thing. I think about sometimes during my hardest days. Listen, girl, one day you can be walking across that stage. Nobody will be able to tell you anything. You can look in the audience and see them babies looking at you like, oh my gosh. Like my nieces call me Tati, and it was like, oh my gosh, look at what Tati did. Like, I want to be that inspiration, not just to my nieces, but to like women, period. Like I said, like I grew up in Brooklyn, New York. I didn't know what a PhD was and like a PhD scientist until college. That's a long time. It's my long-term goal to like basically expose young women, young girls, people of color to science, STEM, the whole STEM period. Let us know, like, we can do this stuff. It's not just for other people. We can be involved in these things too. We can be excelling in these things. We can find real information. And so, yeah, all of that kind of inspires me, like, on my hardest of days.
So, what advice do you have for any person who is thinking about higher education?
Oh, it was a hard week last week. So it's like, I want to say don't do it, but I'm just kidding. Like,
I've had those weeks, girl.
yeah. So it's like, like when somebody asks you during those bad weeks, you're like, don't do it. Don't come. No, don't do it. Like, don't do it to yourself. So like when you have those good weeks, you could be real inspiring and stuff like that. But like I would just say, really make sure this is something you really want to do. Really do your research about like whether what you want to eventually wind up doing, whether this is necessary for you to do. I don't want for people to just be getting PhDs for the sake of getting PhDs, because I think I've encountered a lot of teachers that just have PhDs to have them just for clout or whatever. But they don't really care about like what it is that they're doing. They're not really trying to do any work with this PhD for real. I would like for people who want to like get into higher ed to make sure that their last thing that they want to be doing, this degree really is important for you to achieve those goals. Do your research when you're trying to like apply to schools, especially grad school. Do a lot of research, because where you wind up doing your education, you might be here. Like I'm about to start my 6th year in July. And it's been a long time, but you have to make sure you're going to be in a great environment. Are you close enough to your family? If you're a family type of person like I am, not being close to my family, that really adds to my struggles. Think about all of those things, because honestly, like just getting into a PhD program is hard. And so I know a lot of people might just want to just go wherever they're accepted, but you really have to do your homework. Find out if you will find like, if you're doing like a research-based degree, find out if you're going to be able to find labs that are actually doing things that you are interested in. Be open, because you never know. Like when I first got into grad school, I really wanted to study like blood cancers, and I don't study blood cancer. You really have to be open and go wherever you feel is necessary. And next, I would say don't be extremely hard on yourself, because I promise you, these programs are hard enough, and there's enough people that are going to be extremely hard on you. I'm not saying to give yourself a pass all of the time, but don't be extremely hard on yourself every single day. It's great to like want more of yourself, but don't be like coming down on yourself. Like, talk to yourself nice. Like,
I love that. Oh my God. Not talk to me nice. Talk to yourself nice. Like,
seriously, I mean, like in the beginning of my grad school, I used to just be like, girl, what are you doing? How do you not know that? I would be so hard on myself. And all that did is just make my confidence in myself even worse than it was getting. Being in this new environment, coming from an HBCU to now going to a PWI, I'm in the mirror or at home or wherever talking bad to myself. Like, that didn't help. Go for it if it's something that you really want to do and it's something that you really need. And just really consider how you could wind up giving back, because I think that's really important.
and my last question for you is, what do you do for your mental and physical health?
Ooh, let me tell you. So every single week I go to therapy, almost every week. If I don't go to therapy, it's because of scheduling conflict. But I try my best to prioritize going to therapy every single week. I've got a lot going on with grad school, my own mental health, my physical health, etc. And you don't need to go through those things by yourself. And like having a therapist, it really helps a lot, because again, like that's one of the people that encourages me all of the time to talk to myself nice. She'll correct my language like when I'm saying certain things and just be like, no, let's rephrase that, let's say this way. And that helps me to learn outside of therapy that I should be doing that normally, because that's a better way to put it, rather than me being so hard on myself, you know what I mean? And so therapy has really helped me a lot. I started therapy in 2016. I had been in therapy years ago, but like this, whew, girl, when I tell you I needed that thing, I needed it. So that's the main thing that I do for my mental health.
I know I said that was my last one, but how do you afford therapy?
Trust me, it's not cheap. Even with my student insurance, I still come out of pocket. And especially because I'm going so often. But I just have to think to myself, all right, so it's either you're going to be falling apart more often, or you just going to have to sacrifice a few things to do this. I wouldn't say you necessarily need to go often. Even going once a month and having like a really good session during that one time that you go, and asking your therapist for strategic tools that you could take out of this office and implement yourself without her. I think that would be really helpful. But honestly, it's not cheap. I don't know how I afford it all the time. I actually just got a like this weekend I was lost, man. Like, there goes my plans for whatever it was, because now I got to pay for these therapy sessions as well as like my other doctor stuff. So yeah, it's not cheap at all. I have student health insurance, so it helps a little bit. Plus, I don't go to therapy outside of like my institution. So for a lot of Black people, they really find more comfort in seeing a therapist that is Black. For me, my therapist is a white woman. We have talks about microaggressions and stuff like that because she's culturally competent. We're able to have like a really great dynamic. And so that's like something that I had to kind of sacrifice with not going to a therapist outside of my institution. So I just use the student health services. But I do have a Black psychiatrist, and so it kind of balances stuff out. And again, that's someone that I acquired through my institution. The other thing I do for my mental health is podcasting. I listen to podcasts every single day. That's why I love your podcast. I'm like, every week, Alicia, come on, like, where's it at?
Thank you.
I got to add it to my queue. But like, yeah, I listen to therapy for Black girls, and I would love to, have like a Black therapist, but having student health insurance is going to be really difficult for me to like get like a private therapist or whatever. But yeah, it's expensive.
Mm-hmm. So do you have anything else that you would like to share before we head out?
Speaking of therapy, I have a mental health writing series that I write in partnership with organization called Vanguard STEM. Everyone who's involved in STEM, you should go look that up. Shameless plug. If you're interested in therapy and like wanting to find a therapist, I've written 2 articles about like they're kind of like compilations of resources or questions that you might want to ask a therapist to make sure that you are going to have the right fit. So I have one that's a general thing for women of color, people of color, period, really. And then I have a separate one that is catered more to like the LGBTQ community because, you know, there are more preferences there and more things that you want to look out for with identifying as such. So I can share those links with Alicia if anyone's interested in looking at those to figure out finding a therapist and trying to maneuver through that.
Thank you so much, Chrystelle, for joining us here at the Research Hurt. That's it for today.
Thank you for listening to an episode of the podcast. If you are new, there are more episodes where this one came from. Right now, the best episode, if you want to go back, it seems to be episode 3 about failed drug tests due to hair care products. So check it out if you haven't already. If you want to connect with me, I am at The Research Her on the socials. Links in the show notes take you right to me. That's it. I holla.